Hello, my dear ones, and welcome to my channel, Health, Beauty, and Phytotherapy. As you can see, today I have a wonderful guest whom I think many of you already know because he is a well-known YouTuber and promoter of a healthy lifestyle, Zbigniew Bankowski. Welcome, Zbishek.
Hello, Natalia. Hello to all the viewers of your channel. Good morning. Hi.
Please tell us a few words about yourself. What do you actually do?
Oh, actually, for 20 years, I've been pressing oils and teaching that oils are healthy and essential for proper living. I'm a lawyer by training, but for almost 15 years, I have mainly been involved in education. So besides the internet, you can also see me on morning TV shows, including Polish television, plus of course on my channel, at festivals, and also at various medical symposiums. They invite me, a lawyer, to talk about omega-3 fatty acids and healthy nutrition.
Great. Well, I know how you do all of this. I've tried different products, delicious ones that you make too, bars made from the pulp, from various seeds, from nuts. So really, if we're talking about healthy, fresh eating, you're the one to go to. But I also know that you could even say you specialize in making real apple cider vinegar. Is that true?
Yes, it started 10 years ago with a friend who got me into apple cider vinegar, because before that I didn't know about it. A decade ago, if you had asked me the difference between apple cider vinegar and distilled vinegar, I would have been surprised there was any difference. He showed me his vinegars. I tested them on myself for almost a year, and honestly I said, wow, I feel better. My waistline has gotten a bit smaller. Everything is positive. I started to look into it more closely, and the only thing missing in my friend's vinegars was that they weren't organic. Because today, unfortunately, huge amounts of pesticides are used in orcharding. So we actually talked about it at the company, thought it over, and 10 years ago, we produced our first vinegar from pure apple juice without adding water or sugar, of course, from organic apples. So our vinegar is fully certified organic. However, we've only been selling it on a full scale for the 3rd year now, because before it goes on sale, it has to age for at least 5 years. So it's a vinegar that's been through a lot, but I hope today I'll convince you to make your own vinegar and also set it aside in the cellar, because time passes. And the fact that we'll have a 2025 vintage in the cellar and it'll be in 2033, in 2033, that will really be a cool curiosity. Oh, I'll pull out a nice vintage from the cellar.
You see, people talk about wine vintages and you talk about vinegar vintages. So tell me, Zbishek, does it matter that it sits for so long? What does it do for the vinegar to be aged like that? What changes in it? What qualities does it gain?
Flavor qualities. It's just amazing. I'll use a not so nice comparison here, because in my youth I used to drink what we called cheap bottom shelf wines. You know, those wines like Igrist, the kind you get for 7 zlotys at the store. And of course, you can call them wines. They do have some alcohol in them. When I grew up and started earning a bit, I also tried those wines that cost much more, a few hundred zlotys per bottle. So here you have wine and there you have wine, but the difference is huge. What's the deal with this vinegar? If you make vinegar, or I do, or you viewers, we have a lot of recipes from the internet and they all have one thing in common. We take some apple scraps, pour water over them, add sugar or honey, some kind of sugar, and we let nature do its work. First, alcoholic fermentation occurs, which is why we added water and sugar, so that more alcohol is produced, because alcohol will suppress things like mold. Next, once the alcohol is there, once the bacteria have consumed all the sugar, then the acetic acid bacteria start to work and they turn the alcohol into acetic acids, which are so important for us, and we'll talk about that later. However, if that vinegar gets shipped out quickly, because these days, even if apples, including organic ones, arrive at the factory in the morning, by evening vinegar made from them is already being shipped out. Then a side effect is that there's still quite a lot of alcohol left in it. And now if I want to help my body, because, for example, I find out from Natalia or from Zbigniew that apple cider vinegar can quickly relieve my heartburn. Wait, we can't use such words. So, to get rid of that heartburn, then suddenly the alcohol that's in this vinegar can irritate my erosions, it can irritate any sores, and that's a side effect I don't want. That's why when I age it for a long time, all the alcohol naturally breaks down and there's not even a homeopathic amount left in it. So if my esophagus is now one big sore, if there are a lot of ulcers in my stomach or other things where the lining is damaged, then by not giving alcohol, I'm not able to cause any further inflammation of the wound, or most importantly, any issues related to pain. To put it simply, if a child cuts their hand and the mother confuses a bottle of hydrogen peroxide with a bottle of salicylic alcohol, it will turn out to sting a lot. The same will happen with this vinegar. That's why it's so important for the vinegar to age as long as possible and to add as little sugar as possible, because the sugar that's naturally in the fruit can also produce alcohol. And the bacteria will feed on it enough to produce acetic acid. However, an important thing is that if I don't use this sugar, then I have to be a bit more precise. Being more precise means that I have to wash the apples, I have to thoroughly sterilize the juicer and sterilize the jar, because it's very easy for mold to develop, and then I'll ruin what I worked so hard to prepare myself. So it's harder to make vinegar from just juice, but it's easier with water and sugar. But when it comes to the quality, it's like comparing cheap wine to an exclusive one that's several decades old.
Okay, you explained it very thoroughly. Great. However, I think that among our viewers, there will be people who still make their own homemade one, and it's really great that they can do that, of course. And it's good for them to make apple cider vinegar and various herbal vinegars as well, because each one will have different properties, plus the medicinal properties of those herbs in the vinegars. However, maybe not everyone knows what vinegar is actually used for. Well, even on a daily basis, because of course we can talk about health problems, but for example, let's say someone doesn't really have any complaints, they're relatively healthy, and they lead a healthy lifestyle. Is it worth consuming vinegar or not? What do you think?
Of course, to answer quickly, it's always worth it. And referring to your beautiful statement, remember that vinegar you make yourself at home will always be the best vinegar because you put your own energy into it. Maybe you'll make it together as a family, so homemade vinegar is always the best, the one you make yourself. But is it worth it? Of course it is, because if I have heartburn or reflux, it didn't just happen in one day. Because my stomach pH is off, the lower esophageal sphincter doesn't want to close properly, and the contents start to come back up. That never happens in just one day. Often it lasts for weeks, months, or even years. And if I drink it as a preventive measure, even that vinegar made with water and sugar will help me, because it doesn't mean that we have to throw away or get rid of the one I made 2 years ago. It's also a good vinegar, but the vinegar that doesn't have alcohol and is aged will simply be the super vinegar for sick people, for those, as my mom says, who are already ill. And to answer your question directly, Natalia, for me, a very important argument in favor of consuming vinegar is the regulation of blood sugar levels. Because today, almost all of us suffer from the fact that we eat processed food. And we can agree with that or not, but each of us sometimes grabs something quickly and then there's a problem. However, drinking 1 tablespoon of vinegar in half a glass of water 10 minutes before a meal helps a lot because we slow down the emptying of the stomach. And at this point, we very nicely improve insulin sensitivity. This is important for everyone, regardless of diet or age. If I take care of my insulin levels, I'll be taking care of my pancreas, and I'll also slowly lose centimeters from my measurements, which is very important in today's society, which is not exactly slim. Improving digestion. That's also another thing. It stimulates the secretion of digestive juices. So now, whether you're a vegan, a vegetarian, or maybe you prefer a 100% meat diet, carnivore diets are quite popular now. Because the acidity of the stomach is important for digesting proteins, by increasing it, we really help ourselves. So everyone, without exception, will find something beneficial by using apple cider vinegar.
You know, Zbigniew, what you mentioned is great because it helps digestion. I sometimes meet older people who say they can't eat certain things, they can't eat this or that because everything just sits in their stomach like a stone and everything is so hard to digest. Very often, even in young people, but especially as we get older, there is so little stomach acid that the body even starts to defend itself against certain foods. It simply sends us an impulse that we don't feel like eating it because it knows it will be hard to digest. And referring back to what you said about blood sugar levels, imagine that there are more and more scientific studies on how apple cider vinegar helps regulate blood sugar levels, because usually such natural methods are received differently by other circles of academic medicine. And here, when it comes to using apple cider vinegar, these studies clearly indicate that there is a significant improvement when it comes to additionally using vinegar in cases of insulin resistance and diabetes. So in our times, it really is a huge support, but it's also worth mentioning the significant support for the cardiovascular system, because vinegar contains quite a lot of polyphenols as antioxidants to strengthen and regenerate our blood vessels. And additionally, it helps us maintain a proper lipid profile. It also does a very good job of normalizing cholesterol levels, or rather the proportions of cholesterol. And this is also supported by scientific research. So even for those people who would like to see if it really works, we can provide such information, such links here, so people can read more about it themselves. So the digestive system, the cardiovascular system, it's definitely worth using this vinegar. And what you said is also very important, to use it preventively, even if nothing is wrong, because unfortunately, that's how it is with us. If it doesn't hurt or bother us, we don't think about it. Only when something happens do we start to care. And when else would you recommend using vinegar? Maybe you have some ideas about what other interesting things you can do with apple cider vinegar.
Absolutely. But I'd like to add one very important thing to what you just said, because we can admit to our viewers that, let's say we've already passed the age of 40. You, of course, look much younger, but I can already say that I've passed the age of 50. And sometimes we take great care with our food, we take good supplements, and still our levels don't go up. So, in the same way, we have scientific studies that clearly prove to us that there is better absorption, of iron, calcium, and magnesium. Today, in every other commercial we hear about magnesium, we take it, but meanwhile, our intestines don't quite work the way they should at a certain age, and that's what we're missing. So here, magnesium and zinc, absolutely yes, the liver. The liver produces organic acids, which can be produced in greater amounts in order to detoxify our body more effectively. So this is absolutely confirmed, definitely. However, among those things for which we won't find studies, I would like to mention a few uses in cosmetics. How apple cider vinegar works, and the first thing that you probably use it for, while I don't really, is rinsing hair. If we make such a rinse, 1 tablespoon of vinegar to 1 glass of water, it beautifully restores the natural pH, and because of that, we see a greater shine. You girls go to the hairdresser and she says, wow, Have you been to someone else? Did you do some kind of keratin treatment or something strange? No, I just did a vinegar rinse. We often spend a lot of money on facial toners, but if we just mix 1 to 5 with water, we can carry it in a small bottle, even in a purse. It beautifully balances the skin's pH and even the redness we often get. Since girls often wear makeup from their teenage years, such a toner will be very helpful. Now, regarding acne, vinegar works beautifully as an antibacterial and astringent, so we also use various products. Natural, pharmacological, but if we use vinegar too, it will really be great. The same goes for closing pores. Thanks to its mild acidity, it works very similarly to an acid peel. And again, the lack of alcohol is important here because alcohol never works well. What happens to protein in alcohol? It coagulates. So if we can use some cosmetics, let's try to make sure they don't contain alcohol, and good cosmetics don't have alcohol. For example, nourishing the scalp. We have wonderful grandfathers, usually older, distinguished men who still, know what good manners are and dress beautifully. Meanwhile, well, this dandruff makes it quite visible on that jacket. So, well, there are cosmetic uses, not to mention my own use, which once really helped me, that is with the problem of smelly feet. Or if we're athletes, or we often go to swimming pools, then athlete's foot often comes back because that's just the environment, and here we can easily deal with it. A cleansing bath, for me, a bottle of good vinegar is a must for beauty care, Natalia. We could talk about this for hours again. Not to mention making a good natural antiperspirant. I don't want to drag out this whole cosmetics discussion because that's really my thing. It's very simple. Baking soda combined with good apple cider vinegar, a little under the armpit, and suddenly it turns out that it neutralizes bacteria and you still sweat, but somehow you don't smell.
You know what? These are really interesting things because they're very useful and will help a lot of people. And for example, like you mentioned, for fungal infections on the skin or nails, apple cider vinegar works brilliantly for that. The same goes for scalp fungal infections. Since you also mentioned dandruff, it works for that too. And here it's also worth telling people what methods can be used. For example, when it comes to feet, you can simply wipe them down because I've also heard people say they don't have time for that. Well, if it's such a serious problem, you have to find the time. If you don't have time to do a foot bath, which is very easy, you just take a bowl of water, add about 100 milliliters of vinegar, soak your feet for 10 or 15 minutes, and that's it. Find 10 or 15 minutes for yourself. If you don't have that time, then just pour some vinegar onto your hand and simply rub it on your feet. Of course, do this after washing them once they're clean. Even small things like that are worth doing, and it really gives fast results without buying medicine. Because it's worth mentioning here that antifungal medications have an incredible number of complications when it comes to the health of our liver. They put a lot of strain on the liver, and here you can simply help yourself naturally with vinegar. However, Hippocrates wrote a lot about vinegar. And I also found a lot of scientific studies like that about Oxymel. I don't know if you've heard of it or if our viewers have heard of it, but Oxymel is something that sounds like something you'd get at a pharmacy. But in reality, it's an absolutely natural remedy made from honey and vinegar. And it was used even in ancient times as a remedy to soothe coughs. And I found scientific studies that talk specifically about Oxymel. They also said that you can find a lot of information about this in various old documents, for example, like the German or French pharmacopoeia. I think even the English had it too, where those recipes were given. And the traditional one is 4 parts honey, 1 part vinegar. Mix it and then stir a teaspoon into half a glass of water and consume. Or if it's for adults, you don't even have to mix it. Just take a teaspoon and then drink some water afterwards. But I've also seen those modern recipes that are given in various herbal books, where turmeric, black pepper, and cayenne pepper are also added to the Oxymel. Rosemary and thyme can also be added. Herbs like these also have bactericidal and expectorant effects. And look, vinegar is also a must there, but only if herbs are added as well. I even saw a recipe where there was garlic, onion, and herbs, and it was covered with good quality apple cider vinegar. And after 2 or 4 weeks, you should consume this mixture made with that vinegar. And this is an incredibly powerful natural remedy for the immune system. Look at how many people are getting sick these days. And it's not even about the fact that everyone has caught a cold at some point. It's about how long it takes people to recover from what seems like a simple cold. It just goes on and it lingers somewhere in the throat. For some, it affects the vocal cords, for others, the bronchi. That's because the immune system isn't working properly. We can talk about why lifestyle, diet, stress, and so on. But it's also worth knowing how you can help yourself naturally. Tell me, what interesting things can you tell us about vinegars in general, or maybe specifically about the vinegar that you make?
I'd also like to come back to Hippocrates, whom you mentioned, because he not only recommended it for infections and digestion, but also for wounds.
Yes, yes.
That's why there's this assumption that it must have been vinegar made from pure apple, aged for a long time, because otherwise, well, it would have caused severe pain. Here's another interesting fact. Since I love the history of Greece and Rome, the Roman legions wouldn't go into battle, wouldn't set out like every soldier, unless each of them had a full canteen of vinegar, because it was used for disinfection. It was so that their feet, which had to march dozens of kilometers, could be taken care of, or so that later, if necessary, all those micro wounds could be disinfected. So vinegars, you could talk about them for a very, very long time. However, it should be mentioned about vinegar, why vinegar should be organic. Look, I have this vinegar here, my own, and I don't know if you can see it well, or maybe not at all, maybe here. In a moment, you'll see that there are some strange substances floating in it. Those are vinegar mothers. It's nothing more than a huge source of polyphenols and bacteria, which can really help restore balance in our gut bacteria. Because we often do it this way. We buy some probiotics. There are billions of different bacteria in them. But if there are only a few strains, it turns out we're not really helping ourselves, but actually hurting ourselves, because that one strain can dominate the others, and suddenly there won't be any balance. That's why for vinegar to be great, it has to be, first of all, organic. Organic means that I'll have this green or black leaf with stars here, which means it's organic. It has to be unpasteurized, unfiltered, because what's really important is the mother floating in it. And even if you buy this vinegar, 3/4 of it, oh look, you can see what kind of creature is falling to the bottom here. It looks a bit scary now, because the green bottle and the beautiful brown color make it look like there's something black floating inside. So don't be afraid that it's some kind of creature from another planet, because once you take it out, it'll be a slightly greenish brown, beautiful, fragrant mass. But it's important. And when I buy myself a bottle of vinegar, I leave the last half a glass, because that's simply my vinegar mother. And all I have to do to make my own vinegar is just squeeze out 2 or 3 liters of juice. I never make it in bigger jars, because there can always be trouble if some insect bites through the gauze, or something goes wrong, or there's a bit of rot, so I just feel bad about pouring it out. And I make it myself, even if we're making a larger amount and my wife and I spend the whole day on it. We make 10 or 12 smaller jars so that just in case, we minimize the loss. However, my vinegar has a mother that is 400 years old. It's a mother we got from Austria, and that also affects the taste as well. So it's not just that. Often healthy things are associated with tasting just okay, but here you really get that aroma. And even when I work out or it's summer and I need a lot of fluids, I make my own sports drink. You can use a pinch of Quadawa salt, or you can add a small spoonful of apple cider vinegar to a liter of water, and then the water will start nourishing your tissues instead of just sweating it out. So if you get a bottle of vinegar like that, you know it has spent at least 3 years in a barrel and up to 5 years in the bottle. And that guarantees both the aroma and a complete absence of alcohol. And the fact that it's organic is very important today because we're totally poisoned and our livers already have enough work to do. So we don't need to give it something harmful, even in something that's supposed to be good.
Great. Look, Zbigniew, we'll give people a link so they can buy this vinegar if they need it. But tell us, once they have this vinegar, what should they do? They'll use it up, just like you said, leaving a little bit in the bottle. And then how can they use what's left? Because the mother will remain, so they can continue making vinegar on their own. Should they just pour it from the bottle into a bigger jar, like a 2-liter one, and fill it with natural juice? What should they do next?
Yes, you said everything exactly right. I'll repeat it again. So I take a 2-liter or 1-liter jar and fill it to the brim with apple juice. Keep in mind, since we'll have less sugar because we're not adding any extra, we only have the sugar from the apples. So we need to be very precise and clean.
Sterile as well, everything sterile?
Sterile. Putting on gloves really helps. Sterilizing the jar and the apples can't be typical windfalls that are bruised or rotten. The uglier the apples, as my mom says, the more speckled they are, the better they are. But we usually pick them ourselves from the tree because bruising can mean there's already the start of rot. And a small amount of alcohol will make it mold. So I pour those proverbial 2 liters into the jar and I add half a glass of my starter. Then I have to cover it with something that lets in oxygen and air because this fermentation is aerobic. So I use 12 layers of cheesecloth. That's just how I learned it. Someone else might use a muslin cloth, but for safety, let's fold it twice and we don't have to mix it at all anymore. It turns out that it's enough to just leave it in our kitchen where the temperature is around 20 degrees. With this fermentation, we usually don't take it down to the basement where it's 2 or 5 degrees. Room temperature is good, and I keep it in those jars for at least half a year without mixing. A thick layer, called a mother, can even form on top, which will also work beautifully for us later. And only after, let's say, half a year, I pour it into bottles, and then I can seal them tightly, so that the remaining alcohol, which will always be there anyway, can break down on their own. So, see how simple it is. Make the juice under sterile conditions, add our vinegar mother to it, cover it with something that will protect it from insects getting in, and wait. And just give a few seconds to Mother Nature, a few seconds figuratively speaking, meaning a few months and then a few years, because vinegar can last for millions of years. In Tutankhamun's tomb, vinegar was found that was several thousand years old and still fit for consumption because it can evaporate, but vinegar doesn't spoil. In fact, the older it is, the better it gets.
Okay, great. I would just like to add here, because I think people know this, but you see, sometimes it happens that someone doesn't quite think it through, that we don't buy juice from the store. We make these juices ourselves because store-bought juices simply aren't suitable for this kind of fermentation. It has to be homemade, a nice juice from fresh apples. Then we make sure that it's 100% organic, 100% pure, and that there are no added preservatives, fragrances, flavorings, or anything like that. So it has to be freshly squeezed juice. And like you said, it's half a year of making it, then a bit of aging. For someone, it might seem like, oh my gosh, when will I finally have my own vinegar? So until you make your own, there's the one you make, which you can just buy and use. And even as you use it up, each time whatever is left in the bottle, you can pour it into a new jar. Like you said, because you can have a lot of these jars, especially if you have a big family. And for sure, not everyone in the family will be making these vinegars. So you can make a lot and even give some to everyone around you. I think there's no better gift, whether you're visiting family or even just friends, than bringing something that supports health. because most of us wonder what to give as a gift, what to bring with us. So instead of a bottle of wine from the store, bring your own homemade vinegar, something nice, even with the mother, so that the person, in case someone among our friends decides to try making it too, because I've been making vinegars for a long time, apple and herbal ones. And honestly, it's a great thing. A lot of people think it's a really difficult process. It takes a long time, but it doesn't require that much work from us. But I realize that not everyone will want to try it. So if someone doesn't want to make it themselves, then they should reach for good things like the ones you make and share with us. Please tell me, because I think at the end it would be nice to share a few good words, maybe some advice for our viewers. What could you say?
Definitely watching your channel,
Oh, thank you.
because I often check it out. And when I make that first jar of vinegar, where I use, thanks for clarifying that, the juice that I squeeze myself from my apples. I live in the Żywiec Beskids, so, it's easy for me to find wild apples, so they're really, 100% organic. As for the herbs, the ones you share very interesting things about, I add them when I simply pour the vinegar into bottles, because herbs are something that can, extract something even more amazing from the vinegar, because vinegar is our base at this point. And now, by adding one herb, another, or a third, we can specially prepare it for certain health problems. So there are probably more seeds and different herbs that can be added to vinegar than we actually know. That's why I really encourage you to make this kind of vinegar and to exchange them with each other. I have this habit with my friends that whenever I visit them, I always bring my vinegar and leave it there. Because it's organic vinegar, because it's vinegar that will give us a good mother culture. But also, the one I make myself, I even have one that's 5 years old. So let's say this year I haven't started any vinegar yet. This year will be the 6th time I'm making my vinegars and taking them down to the cellar. So those are actually the best because we add a lot of energy here. And one more important thing, if you have vinegars that you made using the traditional method, where there was a lot of water and sugar, remember that those are good too. And for healthy people who have a well-functioning stomach and esophagus, they won't be harmful in any way. That doesn't mean we should pour them out or destroy them. No, we should use them, for example, in vinaigrette or for other kitchen tasks. Exactly. If I press oil myself, for example, because I have the opportunity, what's the problem with mixing that oil with vinegar? And suddenly I have an amazing salad because, vegetables, some people like them, some don't. Usually it's a matter of seasoning and adding a good dressing. So when it comes to culinary things, absolutely. It's great even when I have those little vegetables that I brought from the cellar and I want them to last longer. By rinsing them in water with a bit of vinegar, they can actually stay nice and firm for a few days longer because it's a natural way of preserving them. So for me, vinegar is a typical product that we can make ourselves. Just like people are sometimes afraid of fermenting, even though it's also so simple, a bit of warm water, a bit of salt, but still, it doesn't work out for us. We can't manage to do it. But making apple cider vinegar is something anyone can do if we do it under clean conditions. And honestly, I wish for each of you to have your own nice vinegar.
That's great, really great. Listen, you just gave another tip for the kitchen, and that's also a cool thing. For some time now, I've stopped using, maybe it's strange for someone, but I've stopped using lemon in the kitchen. I don't use lemon for dressings because there's apple cider vinegar. And I just know that apple cider vinegar will give me even better flavor qualities. And health-wise, it's many times more beneficial. That's why I definitely use it in the kitchen for all dressings as well. Great. Thank you so much, Zbigniew. I hope we'll meet again on my channel to talk about another interesting topic, that you'll accept another invitation and our viewers will definitely benefit from it. Thank you so much for coming to see me. And see you again next time. Goodbye, everyone.